Hello, I'm James Dyer, and welcome to this special RTS panel for the rather magnificent boat story, which debuted on BBC One in November and is available to watch in its entirety now on iPlayer before releasing in the US on Amazon Freevee. But before I introduce our very special guests, let's take a quick look at the trailer.
This is Janet.
Hi, Janet.
She lost her family, her job, and her frog. This is Samuel.
Hi, Samuel.
He also lost his job, and his house, and this little guy. But then, they found this.
Are you telling me you can't use a few million quid?
Where would we keep it?
Now, they'll have to lose this
We
guy
haven't met, but you have something on mind.
He's the tailor. This is called the tailor.
We got you.
and these
This
guys.
is the biggest and most horrific thing ever to happen in this town.
This is one of those moments that people talk about. You find out what you're really made of.
Oh, it's one of those other moments where you get your fucking head chopped off.
I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by the cast and creators of the show today. With us are the writers and now directors, I should say, of Boat Story, Harry and Jack Williams, as well as Daisy Haggard, who plays Janet Campbell, Joanna Scanlan, who plays Pat 2, and the one and only Tchéky Karyo, who plays the Tailor. Thank you all very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Hello. Oh,
Nice to
Thank
be
you.
here.
Well, if I can start, Harry and Jack, with you. This is, it has to be said, quite an extraordinary show. Like, it's a twisting, turning snake of a story, albeit one with a very deceptively simple title. I mean, and it has, all of the components that all great shows should have: a severed head, a bloody Pomeranian, a pottery obsession, an Amdram musical production, a fortune teller, and of course, a boatload of cocaine. So if I can kind of start first and foremost, where did this wonderful cocktail of ideas sort of originate from?
well, the initial premise was sort of something we've been talking about. It was, you often see in the news that a boat of cocaine washes up, and I think the idea, what if some people stumbled across it, was something me and Jack had talked about. But sort of the initial thing we were talking about was doing a show which was about stories, and it had sort of storytelling as the central theme at the heart of the thing. And this felt like the perfect vessel, so to
See what
speak.
we did there?
See what I did? There's a boat's a vessel, Jack. You see,
No, no, I did. see what we did there.
to kind of do that with, I'd say.
And please, feel free to work in as many nautical references as you can
I know. I
throughout
was
this
trying to think
Q&A.
of some
Yeah.
more. So we're
I think
submerged
not.
with.
I don't think we should. I think that ship has sailed.
Okay.
It's
Oh.
le radeau de la Méduse. You know le radeau de la Méduse?
No.
It's
No.
it's a piece of wood lost in the middle of the ocean with people fighting the tempest, trying to find their way.
Yeah.
This is another reference, nautic
Like that.
reference.
Oh, nice. Pretty good. Love it.
Very good.
Yeah.
It's good. You're
It's
pushing the
another
boat
boat
out. And
story.
I appreciate that.
I can't
That's
think of
what I
anything.
felt, actually, I felt being on this lost while Joanna was swimming with the sharks in the south of Spain.
I mean, among all these things, like,
Sorry.
it's kind of a morality tale, isn't it, really? Like, kind of a cautionary tale, I guess, of what to do, or should we say what you should not do if you're walking the dog and you come across a stash of Class A drugs. But the morality of the characters is far from cut and dry. I wondered, as the actors, what did you make of your individual characters, and the complexities that they kind of brought with them? Daisy, if I can start with you, because Janet is far more than just a woman with blue hair driving towards a Thursday.
Yes, she is. And I think the thing that I felt with Janet was that she ordinarily would not do this. A year before or a year later, maybe she would not make this decision. Who knows? But this is just such a moment. It's such a moment where everything is so awful. And we've seen examples of why her life is absolutely at in the pits. So you think that she probably is at core is a moral person, but she makes a decision that is out of character for her, but the only turn your phone off, Tchéky. but the only decision that she can make in that moment, it's just she thinks she's gonna sink There you go. That's about as far as I can go. Yeah, thanks. So it's sort of, she just grabs onto this lifeboat. Sorry. And she grabs onto this and makes this wild decision. So I think she's a moral person who makes a crazy decision, basically.
Yeah, one bad choice and it kind of spirals out of control. I mean, Joanna, your character, I guess, is in many ways the least morally kind of compromised in this. Like, what was your initial reaction to her?
I liked her. I wanted her life. I still do, really. I would say she has a nice life and nobody else does. I think there's something about the modesty of her existence, that everybody else is reaching for more, and she's just not a greedy person. And I'd like not to be a greedy person myself, but I'm afraid I think I probably am quite a greedy person.
I think when you have cracking pasties, that's probably all you need from life. So yeah, she has it pretty made. Tchéky, the tailor himself is kind of quite something in this, and I would say has quite the introduction in that first episode. Like, do you think that scene with, shall we say, the tongue, did a perfect job of getting the tailor across?
Yes, it makes things clear right away, but then it takes quite a journey to understand where he's coming from. Well, at the start, we understand the guy, his business, he's quite cold, he has no, we don't know really where he's coming from. He's just a good tailor and he cuts tongue when it's needed. And it's just business, don't take it personally. But then, personally, we start to understand there is what's happening behind him. And this was quite a journey for me to go through with the two souls there, the one bird with two heads, giving us food to carry on the middle of this crazy ocean and this tempest we go through, and they were kind of playing with our anima, and so I was feeling I have to give myself and to kind of have a lot of confidence, but kind of seeking for things to get to let my imagination find the truth of this scattered personality. This guy seeing shadows in the night, darkness in the night, and trying to gather himself, put himself together through this shining personality he meets, that will eventually help him to find try to breathe, where he's coming from. We don't know all this, but that's what he goes through, when suddenly he sees that woman behind the door. What's happening? He's trying to understand where the cocaine is, but suddenly there is something else. And there is some nice, fresh, crispy pasties, that, wow, opens something in the mouth. Suddenly he realized he can touch, he can smell, he can taste. The desire comes back through this personality. But then this brain is quite sick, so how it is going to end, and it's in the hands and the wings of the two brothers here.
I love that this is a show about the transformative power of pasties. It's kind of fantastic. I mean, one of the things I guess that kind of exemplifies.
I try my best.
Like, the thing that stands out really is the tone of this, which I guess in some ways isn't a million miles away from the tone you guys took with The Tourist, but it feels more extreme here. Like, it's darkly comic, it has properly funny moments, but it's also intercut with kind of surprising brutality. And you've drawn comparisons to Tarantino, the Coens, Martin McDonagh, like people like that. But how did you land on that very specific tone when you were writing this?
Well, those are nice comparisons to listen to. Normally we're compared to the Chopper Brothers, so I'll take that.
To me, to you.
um, we, to be honest, as Harry said, it's a show about stories, like why they're important, why we tell them, why we keep watching them. And for that, we always felt it needed to embrace lots of different tones and lots of genres. And at times, there's almost like a romantic comedy in episode 4 with Tchéky and Joe's characters. But then, you watch Craig Fabras walk through a police station. It's almost in a sort of dark action movie, but with a slightly ironic bent. That felt in a show about the nature of why we do this in the first place. We wanted to embrace each genre, but also lean into it and be quite heightened at each step, so the violence is dialed up and almost comic book and unreal. I mean, when you shoot someone with a shotgun, they don't fly back like that. But all the elements needed to be pushed, but then anchored ultimately by the amazing performances of our actors, so that you still believe and invest in these characters. And that's, without their ability to do that, we would have been at sea and the show would have gone overboard.
So good.
Thanks.
Yeah, for all those things to sort of coexist, to have that sort of heightened violence and for the humor to be so absurd, you kind of have to create a kind of more heightened, stylized world. So it's a fictional place, and the behavior is slightly odd, and everything is slightly heightened, and you've got the narrator and all these things that tell you this isn't the real world, so that those things can coexist, really.
I mean, is that a difficult line to walk as well? Because I imagine, getting that balance is difficult. Because on the one hand, you don't want to turn off people, with things like someone having their tongue cut out, So is it important to work in those lighter moments, like the Chinese restaurant voucher, to keep the bleakness in check?
Definitely. It's always a balancing act. You have too much comedy and the whole thing sort of falls over itself. And too much violence and it becomes too grim, and it's just and that was a lot of the edit was so long because we were finding our way to what the show was, because it was unusual. It was a lot of different things before it ended up as the version we ended up with. We sort of had in the back of our minds what kind of area we were going for, and hopefully we got there in the end. But yeah, it's always sort of take away a joke or make a moment slightly less violent or more violent, in order to kind of make it all sit together and not feel weird and like a sudden tonal rug pull.
But I guess because you have this tapestry of different tones, like it gives you a certain amount of elasticity in where you go with it in the edit. Like you mentioned the narrator, which those two particular stylistic flourishes, like the kind of silent era title cards that you have, and the narration, by Olafur Olafsson, who has one of the greatest voices in history. I would love that man to narrate my life.
Oh yes.
It really brought to mind for me, I don't know if you've seen it from the noughties, Brian Fuller's Pushing Daisies, which again has a very arch narrator to it, which I thought was wonderful. And it works brilliantly here. Like, when you were putting those in, was it all to further this goal of, again, telling a story about stories? Did you sort of go backwards and forwards on whether this might be, a little bit too twee, a little bit too special? Or did you think, it'll absolutely land what we want it to hit?
I wish we had that kind of confidence in ourselves and self-belief. We don't. And the narrator definitely came later. I think we always knew we wanted it to feel about something. But as you say, if you push people away too far and you get too Brechtian and just put up your own arsehole too far, it becomes an exercise rather than a story about people that you can invest in and engage with. But equally, when we were editing the show for maybe 2 months without a voiceover because we thought we didn't need it, and it didn't quite invite you in or let you know what you're watching, or let you know it's okay, these are about people you can invest in, but also we want to keep you slightly at one remove so you can look at it from the outside objectively about, this is how we construct stories, this is why we tell them, this is why, and this is a sort of example of how stories are often constructed. I think that's so important. And once we added the narrator, suddenly the tone became much clearer. You knew that it is at times ironic and distancing and deliberate. And I think sometimes you need to cue people about how they're meant to feel and receive it. And the narrator was a huge part of that. But yeah, that one thing, once we started writing, it took forever. There was lots at one point, then there was none. I mean, the original, some of the cuts, he just talked for hours, and it was like sort of Jack Honori with Dyer Lasson, which is also fine because his voice is like soft honey.
So smooth, isn't it? Oh.
Yeah, well, I think the narration is genius. Like, I think it really works brilliantly in this context. But you talk about it coming slightly later on. I'm curious, from an actor's point of view, like how much does that tone come across on the page? Like Joanna, I mean, let's start with you. Like, did that balance of comedy and darkness come across straight away? Because it's very easy for us to take it in on screen when it's the finished product, but it must be a very different proposition when it's just words on a piece of paper.
I can't play comedy. I don't know what playing comedy is. I genuinely don't. I have ended up in lots of comedies and dramas, and I always think it's about the frame around the performance, because essentially I'm just I'm a character, and that character is doing what that character does with an utter sincerity in the moment with whomever they're interacting, and I can't make that funny or not funny. The writing can, and the edit can, and probably also the cinematography, the actual size of the frame can, but I can't, because I just have to be in my character saying what she's saying and meaning whatever. So I never bother about the comedy. I mean, if it ends up funny, then that's somebody else's choice, really. And I mean, I think that's evidenced in all the YouTube plethora of YouTube that we watch. This is often, you'll have moments of just real life that somebody has, think of Fenton, the black Labrador running across Richmond Park, which is one of the funniest videos ever made. But it wasn't to the man whose dog was chasing the deer, and it wasn't to the deer, and it wasn't to the dog. So it's that kind of, that's how I feel I am. I'm either the dog or the dog owner or the deer in the scene, and someone else can make that funny or heartbreaking or whatever it needs to be for the overall story, serving the beast.
That's really interesting, because that's putting obviously a lot of trust in the writers and the editors who are bringing that performance out in the edit room. I imagine trust is a very important part of doing a project like this, which does seem quite unusual. And obviously, Tchéky and Daisy, you've worked with Jack and Harry before, albeit not on something quite like this. Like, did you get it straight away? Like, did you immediately click with it tonally when you read it?
First, I agreed to work with them without reading, so which means how much confidence I have. Humbly, I say this, and yes, I thought it was obviously, funny, but as Joanna says, it is true that we have to let ourselves be real, and that's why I was saying the story takes us by the nose in a way, and we get funny against our own desire, what I'm saying. But I had a lot of fun to be suddenly asking to this woman, how shall I do? Doesn't want to share with the tough guys there. How shall I do? What shall I say to her? Suddenly it is so funny, so which means that what is funny is the fact that he feels uncomfortable to have to ask that question, but truly he needs to know, how shall I behave with that girl from the north, as you know them, so it's great. So I'm so happy to have the opportunity to do this, and in English. It's great.
That's a lovely moment you mentioned. It's an incredibly human moment where he's like,
"How
has she texted me? Has she?"
Yeah.
Yeah, it's wonderful. And Daisy, obviously Janet's introduction, I would say, in this is again another one that does not mess about. Like, did you take that as a statement of intent?
Yeah, well, I thought it was just a brilliant way of getting someone quickly to a decision that they wouldn't normally make. Actually, I was like, it felt like a clever, visceral way of making you go, you like this person, I think, at the beginning, you see she's struggling, and then that happens, and you're like, right, well, she needs something. So I thought and in terms of working with the two brothers and trusting them, I'm afraid I do just trust them. Yeah. And I love working with them. So they've got me now on every job, whether they like it or not. I'm just going to show up.
That seems absolutely fair. And you guys wrote with a lot of your actors in mind, right? Is that, I mean, presumably that's quite perilous because they could always say no, but is that something you always like to do, to have an actor in mind when you write your projects?
I think it sort of depends on the project. On this one specifically, yeah, I mean, Janet only became Janet when we thought of Daisy. I mean, it was written for her, so it really helps knowing you just have an idea of how the thing's going to end up, doesn't it? It makes the writing hopefully better, and just you get an instant sense of that character. We don't always do it, do we? I'm trying to think. It's kind of case by case, isn't it?
It really helps. You know who it is. You know who realistically might do it. I think because we were directing it, we also thought, let's work with people we know and we know are good and know aren't going to be mean to us and laugh at us, and we don't know which way the camera goes around and what lenses are and why some are long and some are short and what the difference is. I don't know. Fortunately, I don't need to know. So it definitely helps because you just and also with the way I like to work and always have even before we directed is we watch the rehearsals and the rushes, and we try and mold the character to what our actors are brilliant at doing and respond to that rather than saying it has to be like this. We always try and go, wow, what are they bringing out that maybe we didn't foresee, or that they're doing better than we thought was possible, and we need to strip away some of the exposition. So we always try and make it a bit of a dialogue between us and the actors anyway. So working with people we've worked with before or people we know and love is just a much quicker way of doing that, and the work is better as a result.
We should also mention Paterson Joseph, obviously a major part of this and is fantastic, and who you work with on Relic, of course.
We did. Relic was not a good show. Some might say it was a bad show. In fact, many did call it a terrible show, and we wrote it, so I can bear half the blame and responsibility for that. But he was
really good.
He was good in a bad show. The bar is low for that, I grant you, but he was good. So we thought, yes, you can come back, and no one else in Relic, including us, really, because we wrote it.
You guys mentioned directing, and obviously you do direct the first block of these episodes. I'm curious, like, why was this the project where you decided, you know what, we're going to get behind the camera for this? This is what we want to do.
I think because the tone was so, we had sort of dialed everything up so much. I think we thought it's so hard because we did a lot of comedy when we started our career, and so often you make a joke on the page and then it comes back and you're like, oh God, that's not what I meant. And that can be a bunch of things. There's just so many layers in the process that these things become miscommunicated along the line. So with this one, we just sort of thought, if you cut out all those layers, then hopefully we'll end up with some vague version of what's in our head, and we know who the actors are and how they hopefully would do the thing. So I think it was just sort of, for such an odd show, hopefully we'd get that tone and that balance right. Was the thinking. We didn't realize we'd have to get up at 5 a.m. We didn't think about that. All the waterproof trousers.
I did not like that.
I did not like that. The noise.
And 100 persons asking questions.
Yeah.
Oh my God, so many
Lots
questions.
Lots of emails.
Oh Lord. Very hard, isn't it?
So
but other than the admin, presumably it gives you a level of control which you don't have as a pure writer. Like, is that something you struggle to give up on future products, or are you just like thinking, do you know what, I'd quite like to stay in bed until 9 at least?
Annoyingly, yeah. Well, creatively, like we look at it, and I love it. So we're really happy with what came out. So you're like, well, that worked. Maybe we'll have to do it again. But I threw my waterproof trousers away, so
you'll have to get some more. Yeah. And you do hope that, it is the result is better if you're there and you've written it, and you get, and hopefully actors find it too. If you're there and they can ask you what you meant, and you'll know what you're trying to do and achieving the same thing. And quite often, we've worked with the directors and they just had a different idea of what the scene was, and that's not their fault particularly, and it's not a mistake per se. But when you're writing things that are complicated, sometimes people just get the wrong end of the stick, and it comes back and you go, oh God, that isn't going to work now. So this, at least, particularly in something like this, where the performances have to be believable and you have to invest emotionally, it felt so important to be able to be there and to make sure we're all making the same thing.
There's one show before a read through, the director turned to Jack and said, I figured it out. The whole show happens in the lead actor's head.
It was Relic, by the way. It's all in his head, isn't it? Right before the read through, and Harry's like, "No, it's fucking not."
Oh no!
And at that point, literally, they're about to shoot in a week, and you're like, "Well, I guess we're in trouble." You need something to really anchor it.
Oh, very good, very good. But I mean, and especially with this show, because there are a lot of moving parts in this. I mean, you said yourself, like, it's a story about stories, and whether that's the narratives that people tell themselves or how they're retold to others, and you have stories within the story, and I guess that's nowhere better exemplified than the play within the show. Daisy, Joanna, and Tchéky, like, none of you are in the play scenes, but were you there when they were filmed? Did they blindside you as much as the audience when you read about them?
Well, we read them in the scripts and they're amazing. In fact, we had to read. Me and Patterson had to read them in the read through, and I was quite jealous. I thought I want to play that Janet as well. But when I saw it, I just thought they were amazing and brilliant, and they exceeded all of my expectations. They just made me laugh so much, especially Insomnia, which I think we should be pushing for Christmas #1 personally.
100%.
Yeah.
I thought it was good, the show. I would have gone to see that show.
Amazing.
I know we're supposed to think it's naff, but I actually really enjoyed it. And you brought a level of kind of classiness to it that I wasn't quite expecting. And I thought it was great. So I can see that for Patterson, then he's looking at his own life and there's all sorts of issues. But actually, as a show, I think you may have a spin-off there. And a meta musical that would be really good fun to go and see.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, it's not just a play; it is a musical, and Insomnia is, as you rightly say, a banger. Tchéky, you're a musician. How did you feel about the musical elements?
It's great. I mean, I really enjoyed it. It's really, it's very subtle. It's not overpowering. It's not ostentatoire. It's very subtle. And I really enjoy Dominique Scherer's work, really a lot.
Yeah, Dominique Scherer is brilliant.
Yeah, it's really very subtle, very very elegant. I really enjoy it. I really do.
The only mission we had was.
I think it helps a lot, as much as the voice. Dyer's voice brings that warmth that. He takes you by the arms, he cuddles you, and so and same with the music, it's very witty, it's it's very some, and also it plays sometimes against the image, it's a real dialogue with the image, it's not comment on dit merde, too much together. Sometimes it has its own pace. It's interesting the way he works, very much.
He's a clever man. Although we did try and say to Dominic, please don't take too long composing the music, because the lyrics took us as long as they would take to say. It was literally about a minute, and we said, please don't overthink it, because he's such a clever guy. We had a melody in mind, and then we had an embarrassing moment when Harry and I sang the initial idea for the melody of Insomnia to award-winning composer Dominique Scherer, and he looked at us with just like sort of pity, I think is the word. So that was a good moment.
And Tchéky, you do get your musical moment in this. You get to play the piano and to sing. Was this did you bring this contribution? Was this there for you, or did you demand that it be put into the script?
No, they asked me, and I was so pleased. Do you play piano? Yes. But then I had to work, and I was lucky to find somebody in lead, Richard Ormrod, who really helped me to get through 3 chords and play with the 3 chords, and fool around with it and be able to give the performance while he's singing, and I really, and now since then I play every day. Every day I found a very special piano called Phoenix. Interesting, huh? Phoenix coming out of the ashes. That's where the idea, I was always thinking, all the characters kind of comes out of the ashes of their past, And I'm every day on this piano playing. So next time I will do a concert with my keyboard.
Well, a rendition of
with the
Insomnia,
bass.
hopefully.
Yeah. No, I'm working some nice songs, Strange Fruit, some Johnny Cash songs, and trying to start composing with it. You know, it's interesting to work with the harmony.
Nice. Well,
Yeah.
one thing that, from a plot point of view, that did stand out to me is like is Janet's relationship with Alan, because that notion that, like, you know, as a step parent, you can have this incredibly strong bond with a child, you know, who you've basically raised, but then you don't have any legal rights whatsoever if the relationship ends. And you know, that's something, honestly, I don't think I've seen many times at all on the screen. Like, was that something, you know, that, you know, that relationship of Janet with Alan, Daisy, that jumped out for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I mean, that the complexities of that setup are so painful, and I'm sure experienced by quite a lot of people all over the world. But also just the simplicity of a mother's love, really, as another major drive for her to do this thing. So I think that it's just a lovely it's a love story, really. That's Janet's arc, is kind of like she loves her boy. She's trying to make sure she can be a mother to her boy, and then she's trying to protect her boy. So I think that, you know, I relate to that. I have two girls, and I'll do anything for them. So I think the moment you have that in play, you're also kind of rooting for that relationship, which I think really is a lovely kind of heart part of the show, because you're just going, you know, it's a very sort of pure and loving relationship. And it's always nice when, you know, it's nice to have it's your kind of like the love story for Janet being a mother's love. I think it's really touching.
The bit with the frog just broke my heart.
I know. My kids are very upset, by the way. They want the frog.
We have the frog in the office.
Right. Every time they're like, where's the frog? Why haven't we got the frog? I'm like, it's not your frog.
Conversely, I think that Pat's relationship with her son is really interesting, because because that's a really different kind of relationship. She's not a mother defined by the love of her child, or his, that, and you see some autonomy in her and some kind of sense of I'm still me, which is an issue that gets kind of brushed under the carpet, or is complicated to talk about for mothers particularly, and parents in general. So that sense of like, where I lost myself, but Pat didn't lose herself somehow, and she's got boundaries, and I don't think she'd do the same thing. I don't think she'd do the same thing that Janet does. So she's got that kind of motivation. And I think seeing a child who sort of feels like he's not quite getting enough attention from his mum, it's like not quite, it's not bad, you know, she's done a really, you know, sort of 80% job, but there's a 20% that's outstanding. And I think that's just really interesting. And I think to see an older mother or a mother of a grown-up child who is able to look after herself and is interested in herself is really, really unusual. I think that's something we barely see, because women get reduced to being the label of the relationship with which, you know, the dominant story is defining them. And I think that's a really another clever way. You don't just get one version of these identities, you get many, many different versions within these complicated and complifying stories that Jack and Harry put together.
I always think that as well with your relationship with him, though, as well, that you seem so incredibly close, like you're proper mates, but you're at a different stage and phase where, you know, yeah, you're fully your identity, he's his, but he's quite needy. You're like, no. And I sort of see, like, I kind of think it's a different phase of a relationship as well, in a way that you're, you know, but yeah, you've retained yourself the whole way through. It's really lovely.
And Ethan Lawrence, we should say, who is very, very good as Ben. I would give him 5 Bens for that performance. And but also, Joanna, the other relationship clearly that you have is with the tailor, the love story, which is, you know, a central part of this whole thing, and it's incredibly sweet, obviously, when it starts. But I also think it kind of blindsides the audience as much as it does the tailor himself. Like, what was your reaction to that relationship? You know, which is so central to all this.
I think it's Oh, I think it works on so many different levels. That's again, I mean, it's the same theme really, that none of this is one thing. None of any of these stories and the interrelationships between them is one thing. I think there's a level of identification that a lot of women will feel, you know, oh, this guy arrives, you know, at the dating scene, the older women dating scene, you know, the post-50, post-menopausal dating scene. That there's an element of relatability about that. But because it's Tchéky, and because the tailor is clearly some mysterious, I mean, he represents obviously this mystery who arrives in a small town with, you know, with all his Frenchness, and the jokes that are made about that are very good, I think. He's a romantic, an incredibly romantic figure, and going through the idea of, really, me, what, those sort of, am I, no, that I am not worthy of this, surely, or there's a mismatch. I think that was very fun to play. But also, I did kind of fall in love. Pat does, and I think I did, playing her, fall in love with just the soul-to-soul connection. That when you strip away all the trappings of ourselves as human beings, as social animals, there is this just soul-to-soul connection, and they've seen each other. There's a match. And I think that all good relationships are where there's an equality of match. The Beatrice and Benedict of it, in not as witty repartee, but as I see you, and I see you in your whole self. And that's I loved the journey through that. It was really great. And Tchéky was, of course, the dream to play with, because when he looks at you, and none of you have had that lovely experience that I have, it's just very, very nice. Very nice.
Oh, I've had it, Joe.
Well,
He looks at me like, he used to look at me like that when we did the missing, but I'm older now, and you know.
Tchéky, was that a dimension of the tailor that really appealed to you? You know, that while he's also, you know, cutting out tongues and beating people to death with hammers, he's also just an old school soppy romantic at heart.
He's a lost child, and that's how I went through, you know. I mean, that's what we understand from him.
That's the interest for us with this. Is like, it sounds a bit like you're just putting up your bum when you say it's a story about stories, and like it's an exercise. But really, you know, when you think about stories, they're pretty important. People have been telling them for years. There's a reason we come back to it. They're actually quite primal and fundamental to how we live our lives, and we tell ourselves stories about everything, including what we're going to do next week or what we want for our lives in the future. And the one thing we wanted to get across with this and all these different layers we're talking about is that everyone isn't, there's a tendency on screen particularly to have people be one thing because it's easier. So bad guys are bad, and a love story is a love story. And what interests us is you really meet Tchéky's character, and he's cutting off tongues, and he's being pretty much archetypal, peak 90s Tchéky. And then as time goes on, you realize bad guys fall in love, and bad guys have to stay in hotels and wake up and wonder what to do when they're waiting for Daisy and Patton's characters to find the money. You know, there is a whole lot of life in between the dramatic moments that often isn't seen, and that for us is the interest, I think. So giving the bad guy a love story, yeah, he didn't come expecting this, but he can fall in love too.
Yeah, our identities are stories that we tell ourselves, and they are there to be challenged and can change. So all the characters are sort of explorations of that idea to a certain extent.
He was born, there is this line in I think it's the Scottish play, Macbeth. He was born from a mother, you know. So
they're all people. It's dimensionalizing everyone, and that's dimensionalizing all the characters have other facets and things that surprise you, but really shouldn't be surprising, because people do surprising things because they're not always just one thing. That's what we wanted to get across, really.
Because every character, I guess, is the hero of their own narrative, isn't it? The story they play in their heads, they are the star.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of flirtation with the audience. I mean, this story thing is flirting with the audience the whole time with stereotypical notions or things that we expect, and that the audience are pulled in to expect one thing, and then they're given a different facet of that thing. And that, I think, this very dynamic relationship with what? Who? I thought it was a romantic. I thought he was a bad guy. I thought he was a good guy. I thought he was a hero. I thought he was a villain. I thought, it at the most cliched level. And I love the delicacy with which those stereotypes are drawn. And it's just a real playful kind of relationship with the audience. And obviously, I think our job as actors in it is to provide something that is sincere within, so that everything else can play around that. And it's quite a responsibility, but it's also very enjoyable. I love acting. I love being with another actor in a scene and just finding that truth there in that moment for everyone else to then just go and have fun.
I mean, just talking about the different layers of this, as we said, we've got the musical within the story, we've got Les Enfants, the film within the story, a great many layers. We've got title cards, we've got narrations, we've got all these things which are unexpected twists, because also they don't all arrive at once. Like you dole them out as the show goes on. It becomes more and more sort of layered. I wondered, was there ever a sense of wondering how many kind of meta layers you can pile on before someone at the BBC puts their hand up and goes, "Hi guys, what's happening?" Like, did you get any pushback at all?
They were actually
Literally.
wonderful on that front. It was fantastic. I was asked to censor ourselves at various points, and I mean, there was a Netflix documentary cropped up, but we were like, there's a level where it's too much, and it's got to make sense for the story and matter, and actually, earn its place, which I think hopefully all the elements there do at the moment.
Yes.
But the BBC were, they were great. Like, so we were a bit worried. We thought, oh, this is pretty weird, especially getting to the French film, but it was fantastic on that front.
I think the thing about the two brothers that they won't say about themselves is that what's really brilliant is how they're very collaborative. They don't when you're working with them, there's not like a sense of ego. There's a sense of wanting to make something better and being really open to what that might be. So it's always evolving in a sense. So there's a really kind of, it feels really genuinely creative, like it's properly, like lots of jobs I've done where you're like, this is what you're going to do, stand there, say that, do that. This has a sense of movement. And so like, I watched it and went, oh, there's a voiceover. Oh my God, that's amazing. And then I was like, of course there's a voiceover. That makes so much sense, because these guys won't let it rest. If they're not entirely happy, they will go and sit somewhere and figure out what the other layer is. And I think that's what I find so exciting about this show, is that it's sort of, it's like they've unleashed all of that even more than ever in a really fun way, and then realized it together by directing the first two, set us off on the path, and then continued to sort of tweak and fiddle and play and sort of test out what would work and what doesn't work in a way that I don't think many people do. Thank you very much.
Well, as a writer yourself, does that change the way that you approach these roles? Like, do you find yourself naturally wanting to collaborate more with people, because that's partly what you do as well?
Yeah, and I know the boundaries. So if I'm working with, I've done many jobs where I'm like, I'm not allowed to say something. And I won't. I'm not one of those, because it is really annoying when actors constantly want to change their lines. It can just be like, oh my God, sharp. So, I know. But there are other rooms where you're like, oh, I feel like, and with these guys, you feel like you could say, oh, you could sort of just suggest something. And if they said, no, that's not right, you'd be like, great. But it felt like you could say, oh, what about this? Or what do you think? There was a real sense of I think when people are really confident and good at what they do, they're not afraid of listening. Do you know what I mean? Or hearing what other people have to say. Or so, you feel like you're allowed to sort of say something or ask something, or, and they'll go, oh, have a little, have a conversation. And it's just really lovely. It just feels more creative than many jobs I've done.
And I think we are in an industry which is very pressurized and very serious, and there's a lot of people it's very hierarchical, and there's a lot of people putting pressure on the layer beneath and the layer beneath. And So a lot of creative fun and just, I mean, I think to the two brothers bring a kind of naughtiness really to this whole process where they just are like, let's fuck it up. Let's just do that thing to make it different now and see what happens. Or at least that's how it feels when it lands. It's just like, oh my God. And so few people would be inclined to do that because, you know, meetings, these notes meetings and things are so serious, and everybody is going, you know, there's a lot of reputation being resting on this project or this channel or this, or the amount of money involved. And it feels like we're back in the sandbox, able to just create fairy castles. And there's something about that I have never experienced that on television, in a television experience. Maybe a bit more on film because there's, I don't know, they're a bit more kind of arrogant in some ways. But
yeah, so.
More time.
But in TV, it's so unusual, which is such an industrial process, and this was never felt industrial at all.
But the more open you are, the more they, so, you know, you get the scene and then you get like options and things. And then what they did, I think, is that they had all this stuff and then they could then piece together and find the, you know, kind of like finesse the tone that felt the most right later, you know, as they were working on it. So yeah, I think they did that's a first directing job. That's pretty amazing.
Thank you very much. It's painful because I mean,
because you had to get up early, didn't you, babes?
I'll never do that again.
But it was worth it.
It was worth it. And like you said, when you've got people giving you so many amazing things, the hard part is, well, you want to put everything in. And, you know, so many wonderful performance moments that we wish we could have put in, or amazing lines that people dropped in that we didn't write that are amazing. And sometimes you want to put in more voiceover and more title cards, and those things start to feel like too much. So it's how do you marshal that together and also still tell the story and still leave people invested and not get in our own way trying to be clever, which it certainly isn't next goes in. We're trying to entertain people and tell a story that's about something, but we're not trying to be clever.
I mean, trying or not, it definitely is clever, and it never feels forced. And it always, I think, you know, as a viewer, you're never quite sure what to expect next because it changes its shape so often. I'm thinking specifically about episode 4, which is that Rashomon style episode where you see the same events from multiple different angles, which is absolutely genius. Adam Gillen as Vinny, just a joy. You know, and it's just, again, it's the formula sort of shaken up again, and it feels like the show kind of reinvents itself episode to episode, which is genius.
And it's a testament to these guys, really, because you know, when you are doing such odd things tonally, it's always a challenge when you make something a really bigger joke or a bigger moment or more violent thing. How do you sell that, and how do you make people care? And actually, because all the performances are so unique and characterful, but also you believe them in this mad world, they ground it and they pull you through, and they take you with. They take the audience with you on this journey. You know, it's their abilities to do that which allowed us to play and do all these mad things and tell these weird stories and have it all coexist in the same thing.
Episode 4 was the hardest to write. I'd say we had the idea and went, oh, that'll be great, it'll be like Rashomon, and then we just didn't write it for ages because it was too hard. So we wrote the rest of the series and kept coming back to going, we'll do that now, will we? Oh God. How do we do that? Originally, we did have they were going to go to a sort of food truck called the Russia Man, and we didn't put that in. I'm glad we didn't because it's a little bit unsubtle. But yeah, it does come together because, again, Harry says, like, you've got all these different people that you're interested in, and actually, why shouldn't you follow the idiotic drug dealer played by Adam Gillen and see how he came to the weird worldview that he has? He's not just a walk-on; he's such an important part of the process and why what happens unfolds the way it does and the way he behaves. Explaining that and unpacking that felt interesting.
Yeah, and each one of those acts was supposed to be a sort of type of show, wasn't it? That was what was the intention behind it.
Yeah, it's sort of, I mean, Vinny's character, the idea of either is that he thought he was in like a Shakespearean play with the idea. He thinks he's going through some kind of Shakespearean, you know, history play. And he isn't, but he believes he is. So, and everyone is in their own version of their own narrative. And yeah, that was.
And we're sort of waiting for Godot.
Yeah, they're in a pin to play.
Story, and then it was sort of fast with Janet, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Oh, I thought I was.
I mean, really, like this is I probably shouldn't say this stuff. Makes it sort of seem less.
I love
But that was the one script that as well, I'm going to say, no one ever said like you can't, but people are like, are you sure that starting with 12 minutes of the drug dealer, you know, thinking he's in a sort of weird Shakespearean version of Succession is good? And we're like, no, we're not sure. We think it is. Again, no one ever said you can't do it at all. But people were just like, why are we following him at this stage? Why is that interesting? So hopefully people didn't think it was boring or shit.
Oh, it was definitely neither of those things. I think it landed exactly where you wanted it to. It was fantastic. But I think we've run out of time, unfortunately.
Oh.
But thank you so much for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure. Harry, Jack, Joanna, Tchéky, Daisy, you've been an absolute delight.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. We will now sing Insomnia to you.
Please do, the 12-inch version.
Lots of love to everyone.
Lots of love.